Mettalia Tanjaya is an artist and philosopher. In the past year, she studied for a Bachelor of Animation and Interactive Media, then followed by a Diploma in Theological Studies for a year. She is now doing her Masters of Teaching, Early Childhood and Primary. The working title for her dissertation is Why Theology Matters, whereby she will discuss the components of theological studies and provide an analysis as to how it is relevant to modern philosophy and science. So on that note, Mettalia, welcome to the podcast. I'll start off with the first question. What is theology and why does it matter both for philosophers and non-philosophers? And then maybe the second part of that question would be, why in particular did you choose to study theology?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Rahul. So, the word theology comes from the Greek word theos, which obviously signifies God, and logi signifies word or discourse. So, both words combined usually mean the discourse of the nature or ontology of God. And I choose to study theology because I wanted to deepen my understanding of human nature, of the persona and the origins and the myths surrounding the human persona. And of course, when I study theology, I'm diving deeper into the supernatural because we're talking about God talk. Um, so it's a study about the origins and myths which make up the belief in a God, and actually changing the interpretation of those myths into a more foundational understanding of nature and reality. But of course, in a Christian perspective, studying theology is important because it allows them to reconcile with God and form a more intimate understanding of Him.
So perhaps this is a bit of an unfair question, but how would, so if someone who, let's say, isn't particularly interested in theology, maybe like an analytical philosopher who comes more from a scientific angle, if a person like that asks, why does theology matter for philosophy in particular, or for our thinking in general, leaving aside like the academic philosophy, just general day-to-day like normative thinking, how would you reply to that? How does theology matter to those kinds of thinking?
Um, I think that studying theology is important because it challenges us to, um, it sort of challenge our modern secularized understanding of reality from a scientific standpoint. And um, and this includes the study of politics, humanity and science in itself, and philosophy. Um, there are philosophers like Immanuel Kant who derived his philosophy, well, who grew up Lutheran, but then his philosophy is very much in line with Christian ethics. But other than that, um, it's important to study theology from a philosophical point of view, um, to understand the purpose of human existence,
Yeah.
and the codependency with other forms of creation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like the, because in some sense for me, I find that really all of philosophy is imbued out of theology, as in philosophy wouldn't really exist as it does, at least in the West, without uh without theology or so-called theologians, people like Aquinas or Augustine, all these thinkers. Interesting. So okay, let's discuss. This is now we're going to get to the crux of the matter. All right. So I think we got like a very kind of epistemological perspective of theology. It's the knowledge of the universe. Uh, so in your theology degree or in your theology diploma, what kind of questions do you deal with in general? Like what kind of because it's like the reason I'm asking this is, Mettalia, because I find it hard to, like, if someone asks from me, what is philosophy about? I probably wouldn't be able to answer that question. It's about a lot of things, right? And you can't really encapsulate it all in a sense. But at least because you did a more of like a formal diploma, what kind of questions do you deal with and tackle in your theology diploma?
Um, well, I did quite a couple of units in theology. I studied like the historical aspects of theology, and that's church history. So understanding the different doctrinal developments that occurred from the early church to what we know now about Christian theology, from Arianism and then Manichaeism or something to the formal Trinitarian doctrine. And also, I studied the introduction to the Old Testament, which investigated not just historical aspects of the Bible, but also the context in which the people at the time lived in, and the history of the Jews, the Pharisees, and as well as investigating the deeper meaning of the scripture, what these verses signify, and as well as studying about theological anthropology or
Mm.
theology of a human person, which is mainly about the role of Jesus in the scripture. Like, we sort of investigated how Jesus's human attributes as opposed to his divine attributes. So we investigated the emotional qualities of Jesus, like we
Mm.
were asked to actually look into the scriptures and try to understand, like, why was Jesus reacting this way in contrary to this? Like, is this him trying to show his vulnerability as a human person and for us to easily relate to him as a person as opposed to somebody, a transcendental being, right?
Yeah. So personally, what's your view on Jesus? Jesus Christ, as just when I just ask from you, Mettalia, who do you think Jesus Christ is? Now, given that I mean, obviously you've got your philosophical understanding of the world, but also you've studied theology academically. What's your view of Jesus?
I think Jesus is a very important figure, not just historically, but as well as in within that context of the Bible, and as well as a figure whom every one of us from different cultures can relate to. Because in my it comes to the question on because Jesus was raised in a different cultural background, from somewhere in the middle of Jerusalem and that. And it's very difficult for somebody like me, let's just say, who's
Yeah.
from Indonesian and Chinese background to relate to somebody like him. But, there's a quote in the Bible, which I believe Paul says that, you know, um, the Gentiles cannot unite. If they can't unite by the flesh, then they can unite via the spirit, right?
Mm.
So it's about understanding, having a common understanding of doctrine, of of what he preached during his ministry. So I believe he's very important, and he's a in a theological sense, he's a redeemer, redeemer of mankind's sin, and he forms the connection of the material human world, the mortal world, to the immortal, to the divine.
So do you believe that we are, again, this is going back to kind of your personal beliefs, right? Do you believe that mankind are fallen, or that we have sinned and that we have this kind of detachment from the divine or the ideal?
Um, well, from an Augustinian perspective, as of course, mankind would be sin, would be they each of us inherit the original sin. and we are fallen by nature. We
So sorry,
no
so
matter.
just not interrupt, but for context, there, what you mean by original sin? Because I think a lot of people that a lot of our viewers would probably be non-religious people. So when you mean original sin, you're talking about Adam and Eve, the
Yes,
fall in the garden, right? And that's like a derivation of that. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, but keep going.
that's all right. Yeah, I believe it's important to explain the meaning of it.
Yeah.
Um, so in Christian theology, the study of original sin is important because it allows us to contemplate and and think about the implications of that towards the rest of humankind. Although, of course, this varies in different Christian interpretations, like the mainstream strict Augustinian, or Roman Catholic interpretation. Original sin is very important. And original means that it was the first sin that was committed by the couple. But
Adam,
it's, yeah, Adam and Eve, because it was, I think, mentioned in the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
what's the catechism? What's the catechism of the Catholic?
Catechism are it's a, well, it's sort of a website that I came across, which is filled with like doctrines and verses
Mm.
that the Roman Church subscribes to.
I'll,
Yeah,
I'll
and
leave a link down below for that. Yeah.
yeah,
I hope
yeah,
you don't mind me kind of like interjecting as you
that's
speak.
all
It's
right.
just for clarity, just to really get, because it's real, these are really complicated topics, right? It's hard
Yeah,
to,
that's all right.
some of these terms require context. But yeah, keep going, catechism. And
Yeah, the original sin is also viewed as a sort of like a mystery, a mystery that we all cannot really understand because, of course, throughout the centuries, scholars have tried to unpack the significance of this. Like,
for
oh,
sure.
and there are scholars who also believe that whether we ought to have this to ought to bear the responsibility of this couple.
Mm. Yeah, because like the idea is, it's like when you mean bear the responsibility, it's sort of like a very, correct me if I'm wrong, a normative way of putting that would be, oh, why should I give a fuck about what some other people in the past did? It's none of my business, right? I can do what I want to do. Kind of like how a lot of us um modern people live life. We live and let live. Don't interfere in other people's lives. And yeah, I could see that. So okay, we're discussing original sin. I feel like we need to kind of connect this to the overall project of theology. So you would say a big tenet of theology is to try and answer these questions, like what, as in, okay, let me rephrase. Do you ever think, and here's something I've been thinking about recently, do you ever think there really are answers, or are the questions themselves what the discipline consists of?
In what sense? Like, what are you referring
So,
to?
because like, if, like as you said, the question of original sin, from Augustine to Aquinas, like all these philosophers and theologians have been tackling and dealing with this. But I wonder if in some sense the questions themselves are a part of the Christian narrative. And it's kind of like, okay, I'll say, like, support to like my favorite theologian. He says that uh, faith isn't, sorry, doubt isn't antithetical to faith. Doubt itself is a part of faith. Um,
Yeah, yeah. That's actually something similar to what Christopher Morse said. He's an
Interesting.
author, a Methodist author, but I think him and Paul Tillich have something in common where they talk about, Jesus. Well, this is actually in touch to your next few questions, but he talked about how Jesus is a paradox,
Mm.
a unification of sin, salvation, the mediator of the earthly realm and the transcendental. And yeah, a doubt is a process where Christians try to tackle their misunderstanding of the faith, because of course, like, we Christians have come across um for example, the question, like, thou shall not murder. Like, it there were Christians who actually inquired whether this quote is a bit misleading, because some would have proposed that "thou shall not kill" is perhaps a bit more appropriate than thou shalt not murder.
Yeah.
So that means that, um, when is it appropriate to kill if it's not appropriate to murder? Because if you look at, the voluntary assisted dying, I believe that's a thing in Victoria,
Yeah.
where people
Correct.
who are suffering from, terminal illnesses for a couple of months, whether they have the right to have their lives ended rather than to suffer. So we actually looked into this stuff, in terms of, ethical thinking in Christian theology.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that because it's kind of like, for me, I've always viewed, so probably a caricature of theology could be, oh, it's a thing of the past. It's
Yes,
this
yes.
talking about this thing, but it's not really. It's in fact a living, dynamic discipline where we're constantly tackling or even struggling with these existential questions, isn't it?
Yep.
Right. Well, saying that, and I'm sorry to drop this on you because this is perhaps the hardest question one of the hardest questions to answer, not just in theology, in everything in general. So let me ask you, just pretty much without any adjectives, can God's existence be proven?
God's existence. Um, I think, um, well, that's a very deep question, but I think it's
So,
very important and crucial in understanding Christian theology itself. So going back way back to the past, to the ancient Greek philosophers, um, actually that's part of the central argument that they had, that they revolved around, the inquiry whether there is a higher form of truth, spirit versus matter, whether we're whether the purpose of our existence is simply to strive for excellence in the material world, or to achieve something higher, something that is beyond the capabilities, the physical capabilities of our flesh.
so transcendent.
Yeah, transcendent. And really, what reality consists of, does it simply consist of what Aristotle would say observable existence, nature? um but people like Aquinas, would have stated that, our form, there is a deeper, um what he called the form, which exists even after matter, even after we, pass on, and that form returns to God after we die. Um, but
Is this
anyway,
the, is this the sorry to interrupt you, but is this like the Neoplatonic, so Plato's forms, and then the Christian Neoplatonists, so even some contemporary, like Jonathan Pajot or even John Vervaeke perhaps, the idea is there's the physical world, things, and then there are forms that are, is it derived or abstracted out from those things? Or if you could kind of explicate
yeah.
what Aquinas meant there.
So the thing is, the form itself is abstract. It's kind of like, well, from what Kant would say, like the underlying subjectivity that all humans, well, like each individual, share, and what they have. And this is like separate to matter, I believe, um, which, in a sense, when, for example, like our physical bodies, when we grow older, like it starts to decay, and it changes into something else every day. Our skin cells die and gets replenished by new ones, but there is some underlying form which stays the same throughout that process of change.
Hmm,
So that's what the kind of form that I'm referring to.
understood.
Yeah.
Is it even things like mathematical objects, so abstract objects in mathematics? Are those different kinds of forms? I mean, that's probably what Plato would say, wouldn't it? Or
Yeah, because mathematics is logic, isn't it?
correct, fundamentally.
It's like a constant, unchanging, um equation or something like that.
And then would it be fair to say that someone like Aquinas would say that the highest form is God, or all forms lead to God in some
Yeah,
sense?
all forms lead to God. That's more appropriate. Yeah.
So is that the case then, that God is sort of even beyond this world, but also in this world? I mean, this is perhaps where there's that, like, I wouldn't even call it a conflict, but maybe a conflict between the existentialists, or like the more of the materialist existentialists, even the Christian existentialists, and then more of the Neoplatonic uh, thinkers that kind of think of God as an ideal and a form, or an abstract idea, whereas the existentialists, like even Kierkegaard, would say no, God very much is in the world, or Paul Tillich calls God the ground of all being, for instance. And this is, I'm not gonna lie, this is a something I'm struggling with deeply to understand, that delineation. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Like let you your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, there are interpretations like authors like Robin W. Lovin. I think he's a American minister in the
I haven't
Methodist
heard of
Church.
him. Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, not just him, but there were other authors as well who talks about God's existence being unfolded in reality. Because it that is sort of like a more Aristotelian and a more easier understanding of how God's presence can be manifested within everyday lives from like people like you, let's just say, like your kindness or your personality is actually a manifestation of God's existence. Meanwhile, there are philosophers like Plato would prefer to believe that God is separate and he is sort of like unreachable. Or
Mhm.
wait, Aristotle actually said that he's the unmoved mover.
Unmoved mover, yeah, like this is the point
He's
Edward Fraser makes in his book, right? Five Proofs for Existence
Yeah,
of
he's in his
God.
own realm and he does not contribute in any way to, the ongoings of humankind.
So like a deistic God.
Yeah, deistic
God,
sort of
God
understanding. Yeah.
creates God creates being, imbues being, and then he steps out.
Yeah, infuses being,
Yeah,
but he doesn't interfere with the
interfere.
affairs of that being. Yeah.
Well, in that case, then all of modern evangelistic Christianity is useless, isn't it? Because like there's no use to pray, there's no use to go to church, any of that, because like God doesn't give a shit, God's just there doing his thing. Yeah.
Well, but are you referring to Nietzsche when you said God is dead?
I mean, look, of course I'm referring to Nietzsche. I mean, Nietzsche was the guy who said God is dead, but what I meant more was that God doesn't give a shit. God may be alive, but Nietzsche says God is dead. I'm saying God just doesn't care. Like what if it's, I mean, I'm not saying this is the case.
Yeah, yeah.
It's for like a mind experiment, or a thought experiment, sorry. If God is the unmoved mover and God creates being and infuses being, as you said, and then it seems like being is just there, it's stupid, it's just static, and we live our own lives and God's outside of being. So I don't know, is that the argument that a lot of kind of like the you would say Aristotle would make that argument, right?
Yeah, yeah. And all sort of like these, um, like let's just say, I'm not sure about Albert Einstein
No,
or
I
even
think
science.
Einstein, I think you're right, Einstein said the same thing. He's also a deist.
Yeah, he's somewhat a deist. Isaac Newton might be as
Yeah.
well, and yeah, like Immanuel Kant might be a deist as well.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the matter? Do you think God is that kind of, to bring up Kant, like a categorical imperative, or do you think God is a living, breathing God that lives in being itself? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I've contemplated on that for a while, and I think that it's easier to understand that his power is manifested within being itself, really, because he's attainable, although he is incomprehensible by our limited human understanding. He still exists, and he just is. He's always constant. Um, and if and I believe that when you said God is dead, the framework the grounding of the whole Christian morality still exists. And Nietzsche, as a strong atheist, even as a strong atheist, he strongly believed that the Christian intellectual tradition has existed, and we owe our moral understanding of of the world, and that from God, yeah, from Christianity. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like all these normie new atheist people say, "Oh, God is dead," yeah, but Nietzsche wasn't celebrating the death of God. He was, in fact, it was a tragedy for him. He was saying,
Yeah.
we, the murderers of murderers, we've killed
Mm.
God. So, yeah, that's an interesting topic. Okay, here's on the topic. Given that we live in a society where God has died and we've killed him. Oops. So let's get to kind of more for modernity and kind of contemporary people, how we view religion. So let me ask you this: as a person who studied theology, um, how would you say, or let's put the question in more of a negative, what do you think is wrong with how modern people view God and religion?
Honestly, I feel like a lot of modern people fail to look at context, context that is being provided in the Bible, and they would use, they would form arguments as if like saying that, oh, if God is such a kind and merciful God, then He wouldn't have asked the Israelites to, to kill the Canaanites just because He wanted them to civilize, the Canaanites. And there's this image of God as a cruel dictator or the instigator of genocides and warfares that's being formed in the modern understanding. Um, and I personally think that this is wrong as a person who studied theology. Um, Perhaps I've become a bit sympathetical, but I'm trying to approach it in a more like neutral sense, and I think that it is wrong to bring God into politics, because I believe that politics is more closely associated to human affairs, and the whole drive for prestige, power, Um, so just for the sake of these wars, God is seen as like a means of justification. And it sort of distorts and reduces our understanding of who God really is. Because, we don't know really the real intentions if God were to exist, whether his actions have a good intent. And because of our limited human understanding, we are unable to really comprehend the natural tragedy phenomenon that has occurred, and all the wars that have happened in history. And well, wars have happened even within the Bible itself, bigotry and all those things. So yeah, that's, I think, the big issue.
So what you're saying is that, well, there are a lot of things that I want to ask you. That was a good response you gave. Then there's a lot I want to dive into that. So I'm gonna firstly, let's break it down. So you said, firstly, modern people miss context. That's the first argument you made. And the second thing you said, that um that God is apolitical, or God is outside of politics. Is
Yeah.
that correct? Yeah. So God is apolitical. And then there was also your point that this is the part where I don't think I still fully understood, Mettalia. You kind of said that kind of God is outside of day-to-day human matters, or is that what, do you mind expanding a bit on that, please?
I know this is sort of contrary to what you asked me in the previous question.
No, that's fine.
You
Don't worry about it. We'll just, as I said, we'll just go with the flow. There's no problem.
Yes. So, God is sovereign. And if he's really seen as like a monarch, as somebody who watches over the city of God, Augustine's city of God,
Hmm.
that, so yeah, it's important to understand that all the like wars, politics, it's sort of like there's a process about Carl Schmitt, an author, talked about the friend enemy relations, that um, there's that process, and where wait, sorry, can you repeat the question again? So it's
Well, okay. So to clarify, towards the end of your the previous answer you gave, you said that God is sort of outside of day-to-day human matters. But I don't think
yeah.
I understood what you meant by that, because after you respond and after you expand on that, I have a follow-up question, but I'll let you first expand on what do you mean by the statement that God is outside of our day-to-day, like politics and human matters. God is beyond or transcendent in that sense.
I think it's sort of like because there's a lot of emotions involved in politics, and um, it's a bit of a hard question to answer, but yeah, there the relations, the wars that have taken place in history, and that it sort of really explains more about the corrupt nature of human beings, and really like since God provides us the free will to do good, to choose good, there is a tendency for humans to choose evil because that is within their nature, even after they've been gifted by the Holy Spirit. I'm not trying to propagandize here, but that's the more theological understanding of it. And when it comes to wars, I think that it can operate under a moral conviction, but because like the Canaanites and the Israelites that I mentioned earlier, where the intent of the Israelites is to civilize the heathen, so-called heathen Canaanites. Um, so I think it's a really complicated question, which I can't really answer for now.
No, fair enough. But you know why I asked you that, Mettalia? Because in some sense, if that's the case, I feel like God is a real piece of shit. Like if he created us, and then if he kind of doesn't bother in our matters, and then if we're going through all of this, it's something I've been thinking about. Keep it in mind, I'm a Christian, so um, if God created us and God is apathetic or indifferent to our us, then he's a real cruel, evil son of a bitch.
But
But
if
like I guess what I'm trying to understand is why even care about God if God doesn't matter to any of our day-to-day human affairs? Why even make him or whatever, that the idea of God uh something that's even a part of our purview per se? If he's something out there, like just an abstract idea.
I think that for me, the issue is actually, if God is too involved within human affairs, then his being would sort of be diminished, into something lower, and it becomes almost like very anthropocentric. You know,
Anthropocentric.
he's anthropomorphized. There's the danger
But
that
is
God
Yeah, but
makes
isn't
his.
that exactly what Christianity does? Christianity, in fact, makes God a man. And Jesus Christ is God man, right? So and in the triune God is, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Son is also God. The Son isn't a part of God. Son isn't like a messenger of God. So in some sense, Christianity deeply, you probably can see my bias here because I'm a Christian existentialist. So I'm coming from the
Yeah.
existential perspective. But in that sense, God isn't God diminishes his own being to be a man in some sense, to be deeply
Uh,
involved in our affairs, in our political affairs. After all, he got crucified by a state for his crimes, Christ in this case.
I wouldn't actually say that God diminished his own being, because I believe that Jesus is still a separate person. Like, he's got his personality, of course, even though he was gifted with the Holy Spirit, and he has God's presence within him. But exactly through human experience, and this is what Christopher Morse said as well, exactly through human experience, he learns and he develops the ability to regulate, his to keep his emotions sort of in line, and to interact with people, with reality around him, in around the era that he lived in.
Well, but But the point I'm trying to make is I agree with you. I truly believe that, a lot of Christians says Jesus died for our own sins. I think Jesus died for his own sins too. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. A lot of Christians says Jesus died for our sins. I think, yes, he died for our sins, but he also died for his own sins. The point I'm trying to make is, because he was human, he also struggled and felt the misery of human existence, this feeling of
Yeah.
anxiety,
Yep.
temptation, whatever you may call it, what it
The
means
death of Lazarus, where he felt guilty that he wasn't, where he
exactly.
wasn't
That,
present earlier enough.
yeah, case in point. And
And
despite,
God
and the interesting thing there is, it's there in the Bible, it says Jesus wept. But if
Yep.
Christ was, if I mean, I don't know really what Christ still is in my mind, but what's interesting about that verse, that's a very, very good example you just brought up, is that if Christ is omniscient and omnipotent and omnipresent, he would know that he is going to resurrect Lazarus again from the death. So he doesn't even have to worry, and he'll be like, I know this guy's going to come back up from death. But nonetheless, he wept. So there's something very, as you said, very, very well, there's something very paradoxical about Christ in that. But that's where I am kind of challenging you on that last part of your statement, where as if God is this something beyond or outside of our existence. Because for me, the Christian narrative is very much a political story. Christ is a rebel. He's a revolutionary in some sense, and he gets crucified by the state. And of course, this is coming from my bias because I'm a leftist. So I know it's coming from my political ideological bias. But nonetheless, I'm still making the claim there. So what are your thoughts on that? What I just said?
Um, on, you mean Christ being
A
like,
political figure, or I would even say on God being a political figure, on God being engaged in
in
the human
Christ?
affairs, day-to-day affairs.
Uh, well, in the Old Testament, God definitely intervened in many times, during the war between the Philistines, and him sort of giving a bit of an indication or some advice towards, the prophets and judges at the time. But in the New Testament, the role of God has certainly changed. He became sort of like, he manifests himself in Christ. And so, well, yeah, like you said, like why Christ is crying. That's actually a mystery that even like my own teacher hasn't really been able to state. Yeah, I'm not really sure what to say really about God being involved in political matters, because I haven't really explored the question that much.
No, fair
So
enough. That's totally fine. How about we move to? I want to obviously get your writing too. I just want to get these high level questions because I feel like it builds a good grounding to start with some of the high level questions. Despite we did go deep into some of them. So Christian existentialism. Now, for me, this is where I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian existentialist in many ways. Uh, what I'll ask you in general with thinkers like apropos Kierkegaard, Paul Tillich. What are your thoughts on Christian existentialism?
Christian existentialist Christopher Morse is a Christian existentialist. So he, I think, him and Kierkegaard have that thing in common where their interpretation of Christ really intersects with Jesus as being a paradox. And well, Tillich in particular, like he implemented the understanding of essence into existentialism.
Okay, I think we need to
Yeah,
break down some of these things. So
yeah,
Christopher Moore. You brought up Christopher Moore. You brought up Kierkegaard, and you brought up Tillich, right? So
yeah.
maybe you can describe what you meant by that, the essence bit, and then connect it to what you said by Christopher Moore and Kierkegaard, their intersection. Oh, sorry, the paradox of Christ.
Yeah. So, if you've heard of this phrase, like essence, or existence precedes
By
essence,
Sartre, yeah, by
would be
Sartre.
what would be what the philosopher would say. But in Tillich's case, he would have said that essence precedes existence, and essence in his understanding is incorporated into existentialism. So he believed that the central understanding to human existence is from a divine basis, not from the understanding of human reasoning. And in a sense, like we've discussed in our previous questions, the God provides our being and he represents being in itself. He is the central um, human existence. The whole question of human existence and purpose is derived from the understanding of God
Yeah,
itself.
I agree.
You know? And Christ is sort of like the figure that mediates both God and humanity. Yeah, human understanding of existence, I think.
So Christ is like a mediator. Interesting.
Yeah,
But
he's a
Christ is
mediator.
also God, though. He's God man, right? So he's
He's
also,
God man and he's man God.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, fair enough. I can see what you're saying. And so, what would you say is was it Christopher Moore, the other thinker you brought up?
Oh
Uh,
well, I've explored Christopher Morse a bit in my theology course,
yeah,
so he's
yeah,
the author that I'm more familiar with.
yeah. Fair enough. But what would it be like? What are his views on Christ? And because I haven't explored Christopher Moore all that much, what are his views on Christ and Christian existentialism in general?
Morse viewed Christ. Oh, there's actually a lot of his interpretations on Christ, not just being a paradox, but he's also a mystery. Yeah, in understanding the whole Christian religion. Christ is still functioning under the boundaries of time and space, because he's, in a sense, he's not anthropomorphized, but he is still human, fully man, fully God. And he's somebody who's like a personal God.
So Christ is like a personal God.
Yep, like a personal God
So
to
someone we can relate to as human beings.
relate to an extent in order to understand who God is.
Yeah, yeah. Understood. Understood. Okay. So Mettalia, how are you feeling? Do you wanna continue on to your essay? You feeling good
Yeah,
about it?
yeah.
All right. So how about we? I think this is an interesting one. I liked. So I read a couple. Okay. So first of all, you've shared a few of your essays. You've got how does Kant locate moral law and human rationality? Then you've got a good one, which was expounding John Calvin's doctrinal loci,
Yeah,
loci
loci.
institutes of the Christian religion.
Instead of Christian religion.
And there was one on Genesis, and there was a really interesting one on race as a moral issue and the two theological approaches to the problem. Unfortunately, I couldn't read that.
Oh,
So
really?
we'll have like a follow-up conversation on that because that seemed really interesting. But let's go with one of my favorite philosophers, or someone, well, I would say one of my favorite, but someone that I think about quite a lot at least, is Kant. So let's discuss how does so your essay was how does Kant locate moral law in human rationality? Before I get to the questions, what were you trying to tackle with in that essay?
I was trying to elaborate and identify the significance of these categorical imperatives that Kant mentioned, and how they're important in understanding the foundation of Christian ethics. Um, and I believe that in the PDF itself, I talked a bit about evil as a necessary faculty in understanding moral law, freedom, personality, as well as Kant's deontological ethics as a virtue of human rationality.
Deontological, right? Yeah. So deontological is as opposed to consequentialism, where so just to clarify on that, there's like virtue ethics as consequentialism. Virtue ethics probably is from Aristotle. It's to act to become a virtuous person, and then consequentialism. I can never pronounce that word. Consequentialism, yeah. Is the consequences, as the word suggests. So our acts, what are the consequences? And then if you could describe what are deontological ethics, since you wrote about it.
Deontological ethics basically describes a set of existing rules. Um, well, actually, the actions of whether good and evil prescribed to the existing categorical imperatives. And this can be discovered in the rational faculty, which Kant really talks about, which is contrary to perhaps consequentialism or a more ontological understanding of ethics. So actions that don't align to the rules that are considered evil. Um, oh, sorry, actions that don't align to the rules that are considered evil, although it does not rely on a supernatural explanation. Because the word ontology definitely signifies being, right? But the ontology defines duty or command. So it is an imperative for every rational human being with a rational motive
Hold on,
to
hold on.
employ this
I want
command.
to sorry to interrupt you, but ontology, does ontology necessarily imply some kind of imperative? Wouldn't that be the categorical imperative? Isn't ontology
Uh,
studying being as such?
yeah, I would say that it is closely associated. Well, it's about understanding that these ethics that they don't align to a supernatural context, you know. It's adherence to the universal moral law, not to be confused with the golden rule, of course.
What's the golden rule?
Don't cheat, steal, lie. The
Yeah.
kind of
Oh,
like,
okay. I thought it was a Christ, the slapping cheek one. Oh wait, no. Do unto
oh,
others.
do
Uh,
what, yeah, do what you want
yeah,
others to
yeah.
do
The
unto
slapping one
you.
was the Christ. He's got a BDSM fetish, so that was the slapping one. It's a bad joke. I'm sorry. Okay, so okay, interesting. I'm sorry, Mettalia, but I don't think I still got your explanation of deontology. Is it possible for you to explain it using some examples?
Well, and deontology is a study or ethical theory of duty and obligation. I think I didn't know why I phrased it that way in my PDF, but yeah, so it's sort of like emphasizing um uh the was it whether an action is good and evil under a series of set of rules.
Like moral
Rather,
laws. So don't lie,
yeah,
don't
moral
cheat.
laws
Yeah,
rather than the consequence of the
understood.
action.
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
why Kant has this theory of the categorical imperative, right?
yeah, it's sort of like, okay, examples like, other honor your father and mother, don't cheat, don't steal because it won't benefit other people and it'll cause them pain
Yeah,
and suffering. Yeah.
yeah, cool. Okay, so this is okay. Here's a bit of a provocative question. Given that your whole essay, this whole essay is on the moral law, on Kantian moral law and human rationality, how would you respond to those who assert that there's no moral law?
uh I would say that well, from a Christian sort of perspective, I think that even the secular moral law, like what Kant proposed based on the rational justification, um, like it's still important for humans to adhere to a sense of moral law because it allows them to act um, with respect, to other beings because they are also trying to conform themselves into that sort of moral law. Well, in Kant's understanding, religion, moral law doesn't always have to derive from religion,
Yeah.
but religion imposes that moral law onto society.
Yeah, there's a joke by that philosopher. He's, I think, a historian, Marcus Sugre. He says that, if Kant ever confronted God, he would even ask from God, "Are you living up to the categorical imperative?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because Kierkegaard would say, fuck the categorical imperative. There's no, God can do what he wants. But
That's a good kind of thing.
but
But yeah.
Kant would be like, even ask from God, are you living as per the moral law or the categorical imperative? On the note, I feel like we brought up this term a couple of times, or at least I did. Do you mind, please, Mettalia, explaining what the categorical imperative is?
Uh, well,
I
the
know it's a tough, I know it's
categorical
a tough one, but yeah.
no, no, it's all right. It's all right. So the categorical imperatives sort of define ethics or principles, which are rational, objective, and unconditional. he believes that humans still have, the free will, the will to pursue the goals as their autonomous creatures, provided that they operate under the constraints of these categorical imperatives. And okay, so these four categorical imperatives. Number one is, like I said, the golden rule, the universally willed command,
Mm.
such as no cheating because it will not benefit others. And that's categorized under the heading universalizability. Number two is, well, from what my father, who's a teacher, taught me, is humanity.
Sorry, just for clarity, when you mean father, you mean like a church father,
Yeah,
right?
father as in like my, yeah, a priest
A
in my
priest.
school.
Yeah.
Yeah, a priest. We usually just refer to him father. The imperative to respect the dignity of human beings, like abolishing slavery as a collective, and sort of understanding the nature and respecting the collective, really, rather than the individual in this sense.
Mm.
So that's respecting the imperative to respect, human worth in that sense. And number three is a bit overlapping actually with the second one. It's autonomy. So autonomy definitely means self-legislation, the power to will freely, because Kant strongly believes that each human being contains autonomy, and that's what makes them different to animals or other creatures. And number four is the kingdom of realm of ends. It's the idea that citizens ought to be treated as equals in a perfectly moral realm.
Mm.
And wait, just let me explain that. So the father elaborated that in Kant's understanding, he believes that morality is sort of directing towards us, towards something greater. It's in the Christian perspective, it would be like, the kingdom of heaven on earth, in that sense. The perfect rational world that Kant
Yeah.
visualizes.
Oh, he loves his rationality, doesn't he? Yeah.
Morality has to come to an end in that
No,
sense.
no wonder the guy never got laid. I think he died a virgin.
Is that true?
I'm not sure. I don't think he was ever. I know he was never married, but he probably had a few couple of one night stands back in.
Probably.
What was the town he was from? Kant. It was
So I think 1700s, I believe.
yeah. Königsberg. Born in
Königsberg, yeah,
Königsberg. It's
Königsberg.
like now it's Germany, right? So yeah, Königsberg.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure, he had a couple of
It
one
was
night.
just a small town, really.
Yeah, it was a really small town. Yeah, I saw like some photos of his house and all that. It was. I'd like to go there and see, given that it is Kant after all. Uh, so I think I probably skipped a few questions that probably would have supplemented your answer quite well, because
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't ask from you perhaps the most important question for Kant, which is what is rationality for Kant and what is freedom for Kant?
Oh, well, Kant really strongly believes in acting through pure reason itself, isn't it? The idea that, we don't derive our reasoning or our drive to act from an antecedent or a divine supernatural cause, right? It's from within ourselves. And that's his argument with, in touch with your next question, David Hume. Because David Hume really bases his understanding of reason through experience,
Mm.
experiential knowledge. While Kant believes in his a priori knowledge, I think.
Yeah, no, you're right, because like he would say that not reason, morality itself or reason can be derived from the empirical, from experience as such, as in from our day-to-day living, we become moral beings. Whereas Kant would say no, there are a priori categories that
Yeah,
we,
yeah,
again, to use his term, the categorical imperative, that are like axioms that we
yeah.
base
Axioms,
our
yeah,
reason on.
correct,
Yeah,
correct.
because what Kant was struggling with was with like the rationalists, and then the Humeans, or like the
Yeah,
empiricists, and
yeah.
and then like the rationalists were like the Leibniz and all of them, who said that it was all concepts, and which is where he wrote his magnum opus, Critique of Pure Reason. Yeah, that's, I think you put it well. At least for starters, that's where one could get into Kant. So, okay, I'm going to read out a small excerpt from, this is, by the way, is apropos evil. So what's Kant's view on evil? Here's what you've said. Contrary to the traditional Augustinian teaching, where evil is seen as the privation of good, Kant argued that evil is a separate agent which exists because of freedom. In page 59 of his work on religion within the boundaries of mere reason, Kant stated that the human being is evil only because he reverses the moral order of his incentives in incorporating them into maxims. So also, just to add on another small bit that you've said, that you've also said evil arises due to the propensity to commit, evil arises due to the propensity, and in this case you mean human propensity, to commit an act of moral deviation, not by dispositions. So two questions. The general question is, how does Kant view evil? And secondly, this is a part that I'm not sure even how to answer myself. I certainly am not. So is for Kant, evil isn't a natural disposition for human beings, it's something external to human beings?
Yep. So Kant doesn't view evil as some, extreme concept that most Augustinian tradition would really emphasize. Something to. Well, Kant also believes that it is something to eradicate, but that is simply because he believes that humans adopt good and bad maxims, and evil is the adoption of those bad maxims. Which is really caused by the misalignment of the three dispositions: personality, animality, and humanity. Even though he didn't view evil as an extreme thing, but he just sees it as a nuisance,
As a
um,
nuisance. Yeah.
nuisance. Sorry, and it reduces man's sense of duty or command towards obeying the moral law. And he doesn't want to try to put in the concept of original sin here. I don't know if he actually does this consciously, but from what I've studied, he's trying to actually dive his opinions away from the understanding of original sin and how that impacts evil.
So for him, this is interesting. So for him, in fact, the idea of this our fallenness, that we have this predisposition to evil, a very Christian idea, right? We've fallen from fall in the garden. That would be rather antithetical to his idea of man is a rational animal.
Yep, exactly.
And so is that why, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that why he views, as you said, evil as like a nuisance, but not a disposition, rather something that's external, imposed on us?
Yes, it's externally imposed, it's conditioned in a sense.
And then how would you, I don't know if you studied this, but like, what's his solution? What does he say, how to deal with this imposition on us as rational animals of evil?
I think it's habitual, I think for him it's more about forming the habit of doing things that are perhaps good in the rational human understanding. And in order to completely eliminate evil, it's the gradual adoption of the habit of doing this good things.
On the topic, what's Kant's view of freedom?
Well, Kant thinks that freedom is correlated to the will and the incentive to do good, and obeying the moral law under the premise of reason. Yeah.
That's a good one. So let's try to go a bit of, delve deep into that. So he doesn't kind of believe in like a libertarian freedom, right? His freedom is, in some sense, we are free to choose our own masters.
Yes.
And in this case, he would say freedom doesn't exist by itself. It is always to obey the moral law.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually very Christian as well, isn't it? Like God.
Oh, yeah.
God gives us the Holy Spirit, and we utilize that in order to act freely, to reciprocate to God. But in his understanding, it is to reciprocate to the state, or the
Categorical
organization.
imperative, or yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of what, obviously Kant is a Christian thinker, but he's tried to secularize religion, or
yes,
secularize Christianity in this case,
yeah.
to define it.
And I believe that it is not just the rational faculty which really dominates the human nature and cognitive abilities.
Yeah. Oh, so and for him, essentially, the way probably Aristotle would, the way he delineates a man from animal, or human beings from animal, is that human beings, we are rational beings and we can choose. We have
Yeah.
we have rational faculty to choose
Yep.
right
And
from wrong.
our duty, and our obligation is to pursue excellence or virtue, to cultivate our abilities in order to utilize them for the greater contribution of humanity.
Perfect. So we've gone for over an hour, Mettalia, and I think we've covered quite a lot. I don't think we'll have time to go through all your other essays, because this would never.
Okay.
We could certainly do a follow-up. But I personally am happy with what we've covered. We covered Kant. I think we covered, before even him, we started from theology and kind of narrowed into Kant, which I think was a good way to let this conversation flow. But is there anything you want to comment on from our conversation? Any points you want to elaborate on, or any other thing you want to bring up for this conversation? Keep in mind, this is in the last conversation we're going to have. We can, just as friends, we can have chats, but also on the podcast, we can have future conversations. But are there any topics you want to bring up?
Mm, well, you brought up the question Kant's phenomenal and noumenal distinction, didn't you?
Yes, I mean, that would be interesting to talk about. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so Kant, from his transcendental idealism, he really interprets reality in concepts, right? He posited that man can only experience reality from these concepts or phenomena. But noumena itself defines the reality of the object, which is independent of human interpretation. So I think that this is really a challenge, for Kant. Sorry, for us, um, since we are free-willed creatures, um, whether we can actually distinguish um, concepts between reality, I think.
Okay, let's try to use an example. We're getting a bit too abstract here. So noumena and phenomena would be in this, and correct me if I'm wrong. Here's my understanding of like his transcendental idealism. He says reason itself, which is why it's called a critique of pure reason. Reason itself is limited, though we need reason. And he says if we take a concept, there's to an object, something, anything ontologically speaking, anything that's being in the world, that there's a noumenal reality. So that is something in itself, let's say, and we have no access to it. And then there's the phenomenal reality, which is what we can perceive and interact with. So we never fully. Sorry, someone rang the bell in my house. I
Okay.
apologize. So we never fully can grasp the whole concept. Is that what he means?
Yeah, the whole concept of what reality is, let alone the reality of God. Oh, sorry, not God. Of like moral laws,
Moral laws
and
and whatnot. Yeah.
and why we have, because rationality, I believe, is not enough to really explain why we need to have such a strong obligation to follow it.
Oh, totally. I mean, look at this conversation. You and I are trying to be rational, and
Yeah,
we're falling over our heels. Like it's a tough thing to articulate a rationally why one should be moral, or why one should believe in God and whatnot, right? So
he's referring to it more from a collective perspective rather than individual.
interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, because the idea that do we should our actions are sort of conducive or towards the greater benefit or the greater suffering of humanity. It's sort of a more collective understanding of, those imperative, the actions. But individuals, as individuals, we have the greater autonomy to choose and, to do good or rational things.
Certainly, certainly. All right, Mettalia, anything else? I'm happy with what we've covered so far. Is there anything else you want to bring up? I know in the PDF I shared with you, we had like heaps of questions, but just because of time constraints, and I wasn't expecting to go through every single essay today.
All
Uh,
right, that's all
any
right.
any other? But no. But if there's anything in particular that you find interesting from our conversation, or that you want to bring up, you certainly can.
Well, I just want to give an advice to people who, I suppose, interested in theology or,
Oh yes, that would be
even,
a great way to end it.
yeah,
Actually, that'd be
I
fantastic.
don't,
Yeah.
I think that it's important for, well, existentialists or philosophers or anybody really who's new to philosophy or theology, who to study theology, because it really dives deep into understanding the nature of man, even if it's from a Christian perspective. And it sort of opens our mind into thinking deeply, in deeper sense, um, challenging our preconceived notions of what reality is, of what man is, and who are we, and the whole question of existence and values, norms of institutions, understanding the, I guess, the Roman Church, like,
Certainly.
and the
But even
actions of
historically,
Martin.
right? Even
Yeah,
historically, a historical
yes,
understanding, as you said, context. Yeah.
context, the actions of Martin Luther, like why he became a revolutionary. I'm
Oh,
happy to do like a separate, well, I guess like a video or something about
it's a great
Luther's,
idea. Yeah, yeah.
his,
I mean,
or
we could discuss him about also like on your point though, or even why Christ himself was a revolutionary for his time. I mean, he got crucified after all. So,
yeah, yeah.
all right, that's probably a good place to end it. Thank you, Mettalia.
Thank you, Rob.
Okay.